that. Amazing. Cool. Let's change it up. Well, welcome to my friends. It's so nice to be back at DDD. As some of you may know, DDD was the first ever conference that I spoke at quite a few years ago now. And one of the things I love about DDD is the opportunity that it gives new speakers a chance to speak in a safe environment and not, practice the nerves, which never go away, can I tell you. Anyway, it's really lovely to be here. I get lots and lots of questions consistently, but especially this year about salary conversations, promotion conversations, and in the current climate where there has been a lot of redundancies, we thought that it was a very good topic just to have a very transparent conversation about and also answer any questions that you have as well. So I'm really excited that Akanksha and Josh could join me today. Akanksha is joining us from Melbourne. She is a data consultant, a Microsoft AI MVP, and an international speaker. After studying financial maths and actuarial, I can't say that word, is that correct? Almost. Science at UCC Ireland, she realised she wanted to work with people as well as numbers. As a consultant, she works with clients to help them solve problems by making more informed decisions with data. She's a firm believer of diversity and inclusivity. She loves machine learning and that it's becoming more accessible to everyone, isn't it? That's a whole nother talk. She is an avid advocate for women in STEM and is currently the Network Director of Women Who Code Melbourne and an advisory board member for Tech Diversity Lab. Thank you, Akanksha, for trekking from Melbourne. Josh, one of our locals. So J.Sewell gave a one-liner introduction on himself, which I'm going to just ignore. But Josh has been in the tech space for a long, long time, definitely over 20 years. He is as old as me, nearly.
I am the token middle-aged guy on this panel. I've never been the diversity inclusion before, and I don't know how to feel, but I think it's a great thing. So thank you, Donna, for having me today.
You're welcome. Thank you for being our diversity hire on the panel. Over 20 years in tech, in a range of roles, but as a technical consultant, also leading projects, leading large teams, managing practices, P&Ls, multiple countries, high-profile companies such as PwC, Inside, now at AWS, looking after AWS partners and customers across Australia. So I will caveat that we are not here speaking on behalf of our organisations. We are speaking on behalf of our many, many years in the tech industry and our experiences that we've personally had. So you will notice up there, if you have not already, there is a menti.com website with a number, and there's also a QR code. So throughout this panel discussion, I have a few questions that I'm going to kick off with, but then I'm going to be looking through all of your questions that come up on menti.com and asking your questions as well. So just keep them coming throughout the discussion, and they will hopefully we'll get time to answer quite a few of them. So let's kick straight into this. Top tips for negotiating a pay rise, some do's and don'ts. Josh, get straight into it.
I'm happy to go first. I just want to clarify as well, it was a joke about me being a middle-aged white guy, but I do obviously have an extreme level of privilege being a 42-year-old white male working in the tech industry. So I guess my perspective I'm bringing today is more so from the manager side of things. Back of the napkin calculations, I've probably done about 300 to 500 salary review meetings in my career. So I've seen a lot. I've seen what works. I've seen mistakes that are made. So please take that perspective from me today as opposed to tips on how to actually negotiate salary, because again, my experience will be very different to a lot of the people in the room. Look, the first thing I'll say, and the most important takeaway, is if the first conversation you're having about salary is at your formal salary review meeting, it's too late. You need to be having these conversations earlier. The amount of work that goes on behind the scenes for any organisation, whether they're a 15-person organisation or someone the size of AWS, in terms of creating budgets for pay increases, assigning those, all the performance management metrics that go on behind the scenes. By the time you have that formal review meeting, the outcome is basically 95% locked in. So, the big takeaway is if you're not happy with your salary, if you're looking to improve in that regard, start to have those conversations early. The second point would be understand the world that you're working in. So I'm not saying go and get an AFR subscription, although it's probably not a bad idea, but have an idea of the macro world around you, what's happening with interest rates and inflation and so on and so forth, and use that to inform the conversation, but don't use that as an excuse. Because your employer, at the end of the day, can't give you a pay rise because inflation is high or because your rent's gone up. That's not in their remit to even do so, even if they do actually feel empathy for your situation, and I guarantee you that they will do more often than not. And I guess the third thing in terms of what to do, your salary negotiation process, when you're talking and having these meetings around performance review, etc., it's really about your future. There's a really great book by Chris Voss. It's called Never Split the Difference. He is an FBI hostage negotiator. I did a whole negotiation behaviour unit in my MBA and learned absolutely nothing, but this book kind of changed my life. And really, the similarities there between hostage negotiation and salary negotiation, etc., is you're not bargaining for today, you're bargaining for your future. So the best question you can ask in that scenario is, what are the strategic projects that are important to you as a company? What are the things that I can do as your employee to help make you successful as a manager? That automatically changes that conversation from day one from self-centered to we-centered, and it will get buy-in from your manager. They will automatically go, hey, this person is actually thinking about not just the next 6 months, but in a time where no one stays around for 10 years most places, but for the next 2 years, right? I can see that they're bought in. And even if there isn't that strategic project that I can get involved in day one, when it does come along, you'll be in front of the queue to get involved in it. And those are the things, when you come around to your next pay review cycle, that will be remembered, that will be seen in your overall body of work as something that was adding value, and that will give you so much more power when you're trying to negotiate that next pay increase.
That was so well done. Oh, my Lord. I guess I'm going to be coming at it from a slightly different perspective to Josh, because we were talking about it yesterday. I'm like, right, okay, I'll do exactly the opposite. I'll be the one with slightly more earlier, but also mid level career people kind of coming in and having those conversations. And the biggest one that I've seen over the last couple of years in my career was knowing numbers, knowing what's actually normal in the industry. Is really, really hard, especially if you've just started or are in a new market, if you've just relocated. You don't know what is the normal number for senior software engineer, senior data engineer. They are different everywhere. And the more data points you have, the better it is. I'm a data person. The more data points it is, the better it is in general. And related to that data kind of points, the other thing, as much practice as you can get in these conversations of knowing what you're going to react to and how your body is going to react to in a situation that is stressful and feels really, really awful, the better you'll be and better able to manage those conversations. I've probably done about 100 talks at this stage, and my heart rate is pretty high right now because it's the first time I've spoken here. And it'll calm down, I'll be back to normal in 10 or 5 minutes. And I know that, so I'm all right, okay. The minute I start talking, I'm gonna go really, really fast. And I know about myself, so I'm gonna start slowing down soon enough. And the same thing happens in those kind of conversations. I know I'm going to be really stressed out, and then I'm going to start talking too fast, and then I'm going to trip over my own words, and now no one knows what's happening because they can't understand what I'm saying, and this is a mess. And then I'm more stressed about the fact that I can't even say what I'm trying to say. So the more of those conversations you have, and the more times you put yourself in those situations, you know what you're going to be like and can kind of manage it a bit better. And yeah, the other end is, people on the other end of it have been in those situations so many times that this is not something new to them. This might be your second or third time having this conversation of hey, I really like an extra $10,000 and this is going to be boring a hole into my head for weeks leading up to it. They've had 300 of these conversations, and this is very BAU for them. So you need to also get to a stage where it's a little bit more BAU for yourself to be in that situation. They're the two big ones, I think, for me, leading into it.
Love them, +1 to everything. And I think you kind of touched on it a little bit, but I would say also avoiding the comparison discussion. Take it away from, I know something that comes up a lot, and I have had these conversations on both sides where you find out someone else is the same role as you, same level, and they're earning a lot more than you. And it's well, hang on, that's not fair. So straight away you want to go and have a conversation with your boss and say, well, hang on, they're earning this, that's what I should be earning. I would recommend staying away from the comparison conversation. When you're going to talk to your leader, it's about data, market rates, this is the research that I've done, this is the level of salary that is market and looks like it's fair for the role that I'm doing. These are the things that I've been bringing to the table. These are some of my achievements. This is what I'm looking for. And if the answer is no, we don't have budget right now, which sometimes it is, then it's about the planning. Well, when is the next cycle? When is the budget resetting? What do you need to see from me in order to be a top performer, in order to deliver extra value to the business that will make it worthwhile to have this extra money? So I think there's lots of different things in that. I guess my follow-up question is, how do you manage those conversations when, like right now, your leader might pull the economy is bad card, or we don't have budget? Like, what are some of the tips for then managing that conversation?
I think probably I covered it mostly in that preparation part, right? It's very easy for someone who knows more about something than you to use that argument against you. So if your manager says, well, the economy's stuffed, so therefore you only get a 2% pay rise or whatever, and you don't have any points to counter that with, then it's very hard to make that argument. And again, this is not, you need to understand the economy from the bottom, like the ground up, but having a basic understanding of the Australian economy and what's going on globally, I think is really important, and it's always been useful for me. But more importantly is know what's going on in the company you work for. So if your CEO or management team isn't on a regular basis providing updates of the financial performance of the business, ask them to do that. And if they are sharing it, but they're just sharing it via email, take the time to read it, have enough knowledge of what is going on in the organisation around you, because once again, salary negotiation is like 50% about your performance and 50% about the business that's going on around you, right? So the more information you have, the more prepared you can be, the less weak arguments can be used to shoot down your request.
Yeah, look, and at the other end of it, it's not just you. I want to make that, if you've had that conversation, I've been in a conversation like that where I've had someone go, you should be lucky you have a job, don't ask me for more money. And I was like, excuse me? Whoa, this was not the response I ever expected to just immediately hear back when all I came in to have a conversation was like, hey, how's performance going? I would like to talk about this. And I was like, I wasn't even asking for money straight away or anything like that. It was the build up of those conversations over time of what can I do? How can I help with the business? Where can this go? So yeah, those kind of conversations do happen sometimes. And then it's a case of okay, planning in time. And it really just goes back to Josh's point. The more in advance planning you can do in terms of, okay, what do you need to see and what can we do? And if the answer just isn't changing, it's time to start looking for a job. If this just might not be the right business. And I think we talked about this a little bit earlier in a pre-prep conversation, but budgets are different in terms of retaining talent and retaining people than hiring new talent and hiring new people. So it might just be the case that it's time to have a look somewhere else. But yeah, more and more conversations you can have at a regular basis with kind of people in those positions, given the context of everything else that might be happening, is usually going to be your best point of gathering those data points.
Yeah, and we did have a conversation around when you change roles, a lot of the time that is one of the opportunities where it is an opportunity to get quite a significant bump, whereas when you are getting a salary increase in your current role, it can be more difficult, but there's a lot of considerations to take into account, not just money, as part of benefits and working for a company and et cetera, which goes to an audience question that I think kind of continues this conversation. And the question is, a year after a significant bump in salary, how do you present the argument for another 12 months immediately after? Do you not and just chill out, or do you wait for the review, see what comes unprompted? And I think we touched on this when we were pre-chatting around what's important to you, what equals success, what are your goals, and et cetera, So, thoughts?
I think it really depends on what's been happening over the 12 months. It's great, if your business values you and they're paying you all this money, they do expect something on the other end of it. They need to justify why they're paying out that kind of money. So if you're asking for more, great. What's your justification? And I used to hate this earlier on, where I was just like, oh my God, I've done my job. What more do you want from me? I would like to pay my bills and move on, thank you. But the more and more further you get into your career, it does start changing, because they do start expecting a bit more if you're asking for that. So regularly, and this is so hard to do, and I still struggle. I've been a consultant and I've had to do weekly timesheets, and I couldn't tell, every Friday was a struggle to be like, what did I do this week? So when a 12-month later review period comes along, what did I do for the last 12 months? I'm not going to remember anything. So as much as you can, keeping that evidence, keeping kind of a track record of, hey, what have I been doing? What have I been adding back to the business? And making those very tangible points of, hey, I've added this much value, and it's just fair in the sense of like, if I've added $25,000 worth of value, I'm only asking for a percentage of this. I'm sure you've done much more than that in terms of context and numbers. So the more factual numbers and stuff you can bring into those conversations, and again, I would say be having those conversations quite regularly with your manager and how you're going and how you're performing. And hey, am I hitting the expectations you had? And if I'm not, let's have a chat. What can I be doing? And keeping them updated. I'm like, no, we had a chat last week about how I was struggling with this thing. And now look, I'm working on this thing. I'm constantly improving. They need to be able to tangibly see that over the time too. So the more and more conversations you can have, the better that use case is going to be down the line.
I think there's an expectation, quite rightly, early on in your career that you can get like a 10 to 15%, 25% in these crazy times pay bump early on, and that's true, and that makes sense, right? There's also a certain point in most people's career where they don't realise that kind of plateaus off if you're just going at the same rate. So there's, to add to what you said there, like write everything you do down, because if you don't have documented evidence of what you've done, then it's really hard to then tell that in a story when you're doing that pay review. The second one goes back to make sure what you're working on, particularly outside your day job, like if you're consulting your billable hours or whatever, if you're doing a cool project on the side, make sure it's something that you've spoken to your manager and there's some tangent between what they're focused on and what you're doing. That way they can sort of recognise you for that as well. And I guess the third thing would be just have a think about things outside of salary. We have a real fixation on the dollar value in Western Australia. I guess because of the mining, right? So everyone goes, well, my mate drives trucks up at Port Hedland and earns 200 grand a year, so I should be doing that, not realising that their mental health is falling apart. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. I'm not to swear here, they pee it all up against the wall and they're not saving kind of thing, right? And we just have in Western Australia, compared to other places I've been, this fixation on that. So what else do you want? What else do you value, that isn't just salary? And can you ask for that instead? I've had two really one great and one really bad salary negotiation in my time related to packages. The first one, I got given a car when I lived in London. I didn't need a car. I couldn't drive a manual, but that was what they offered me, and I took it. And I sat in the car park for an hour and a half trying to work out how to put it into reverse, an hour north of London, and then driving through London is the scariest thing you'll ever do. It was ridiculous, right? But I just didn't know what was going to be important to me. Flip side of that, when I moved back from doing my 4 years as a backpacker and, working in consulting in the UK, I wanted to keep traveling. So I said, hey, what's really great for me is I'd love to go to the SharePoint conference in Vegas this year and subsequent years. And I asked them to write that into my contract, and I was willing to take a bit of a hit on the pay because I was at the top of the band in exchange for something that I could then give value back to them. And their negotiation back to me is, cool, you can do that, but you'll be up on stage talking about what you saw, you'll be doing internal presentations, and you'll be doing all that sort of stuff. That value exchange was a no-brainer for me. So I end up getting the 10K of value, I get to do something awesome, and the company still benefits from it. So you just get creative with the thinking around that stuff and don't just think of the dollar number, I guess.
Yeah, love it. +1 to everything. A lot of the questions I think you're kind of touching on that have been coming in from the audience around, how it differs from an early career perspective versus as you progress more in your career. And I think it definitely does change, as you've said. I think earlier in your career, it's very easy to keep getting those 10K pay bumps every year. As that progresses and you get more senior, it does slow down, and there's other benefits that you have to think about as well. The other question that I've already forgotten, there was something around, specific, how do you demonstrate what when you're having that conversation about salary, how do you demonstrate what you've done? And I think the point's already around keeping track of it, send yourself an email, keep an email list or whatever drive you use in the cloud, keep a list of all the things that you're doing, the projects that you're doing, the achievements inside and outside of work. I think those things are really important to bring to the table in your discussions, as you've said. This was an interesting one. How would salary review questions or the process differ between large organisations and small organisations, and what are some of the kind of difficulties or solutions in those discussions with the two extremes? And I think that's a very interesting and valid question.
So I've worked for Big Four. I now work for AWS, and I've worked for 20-person consulting organisations. The process it's still pretty similar. It's just the number of contact points and the amount of work needed to prove what you've been doing increases significantly. So at the end of the day, you're not going to have as much flexibility on your pay band working for a massive organisation, but you're also probably going to have a lot more clarity on what you need to do to get to that next level, whether that be promotion or something along those lines, because they tend to publish, this is the range for X number of years of experience, sort of at this rate. We get asked a lot in the AWS world and similar to PwC to create what we call our body of work. And that, again, goes back to the strategic stuff that we do that is outside of the core function of our job to make sure that sort of aligns. Smaller companies, again, it really depends. It's more likely to run into challenges, well, not challenges. For me, again, I'll put my privilege hat on. It was easy for me because I was a guy that worked in tech that was able to sit up on a stage and talk into a microphone. So I never had a challenge in that regard. I was very lucky. And I worked alongside colleagues who were way smarter than me and way more technically proficient and way better at their job that were not getting pay rises, at the same time kind of thing. So I think it's really important to try and call some of that stuff out if you're working in a smaller organisation. It doesn't happen anywhere near as much anymore from what I know, which is great. But at that stage, there's not, if you're in a situation where you're just not getting that progression, and hopefully there's no managers of people in the room here, leave. There's enough work here. As much as it is a slightly challenging time, this is probably the third best time ever to work in tech behind the last couple of years and 1999 when the millennium bug hit, right? So it's all relative. There is so much work. Every single company that is a big company is trying to build up their own IT arm and they're doing their own product development. You've got things like Web3 and you've got Gen AI. There's so much good stuff happening. Having an awkward pay conversation or being constrained by that shouldn't be a blocker in your career.
Yeah, I think I've kind of worked for smaller places now. I used to say that, and then I think about the fact that they're like 200-300 people, and that doesn't really feel that small. But if you look at it locally, there is about 30-40 people in the business, and you probably talk to your team and then the one up and maybe one up, kind of make the effort to talk to a few other people around. I know it's not easy and I know it's not fun, but just chatting to them what you've been doing, how's it been going, to asking them about what they've been doing. And it is kind of part of networking and just building that kind of sphere around you. But the more people that know what you've been up to and what you've been building, the better it is for you. It's the classic thing of this person has been doing all this amazing stuff, but no one knows about it. And that has happened so many times where someone, I'd just be sitting beside them for the day and I'll see it. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second. Why has no one heard about all the stuff that you've done? And they just don't feel comfortable doing that, right? And which is completely fair, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when it does come around to those conversations, they are awkward conversations. And if it is easier for you to have those conversations through email, where you can actually sit down in your own space where you're comfortable and write out exactly what you want to say and this is what I've done and justify it, do it that way. Whatever way feels more comfortable for you, prep that. And if your manager is someone's like, no, we'll have this one-on-one, in-person conversation. I've had that where I'm like, I would have rather have this conversation over Teams where I could have been at home and I know exactly where I would have been comfortable, but they really didn't want that. There's ways you can go around that by prepping to go into those conversations. The biggest tip someone gave me, especially in a salary negotiation scenario, was writing down just the one-liner of exactly what you wanted to say. It's based on everything we've talked about and all the responsibilities you've told me about this role, I would be expecting X. And then stop talking. Do not spiral. Sit in the silence. If it's going to be a 10-minute silence and they don't say anything, you sit in the 10-minute silence. You don't say another word. And that is impossible for me to do. It took the only way that worked for me is I literally had it written on a Post-it in front of me, and this is where I was on Teams call. And I read it, and I just stopped talking. And I built it up in my head of I mean, people on the other side, they know these are tactics and they know they do that. They leave the silence open to see what else you're going to say. And I'm like fully sweating at this stage. It was the first time I'd asked for any little bit more money. I was literally asking for like an extra 5K, I think. And I was like, please, this is so terrifying. And the person on the other end was like, oh, okay, perfect. Look, we'll take that back to our manager and we'll let you know. And I was like, that was it? That's all I had to do? And I built it up for like so much. Be okay with the silence. Like that was the biggest thing I'd learned, but especially when it's kind of that small consulting world or small business world. You start knowing what the other people are like. You build those relationships and you know how they're going to react. So if they are someone who leaves you be in the silence and lets you fill the gap, know that and be comfortable with it. And yeah, building that out I think helps a lot.
And it gets easier. It's the same as public speaking. Yes, you still get nervous, but it gets easier every time you do it. So there was the questions around, being early career and how do you prep for the conversations and build the confidence. It really is a practice thing. It's practicing it first with people that are safe, then practicing it with your managers, and then each time you do it, you'll get better at it and it will get easier, I promise.
It's also really hard for your manager, that conversation, right? Like, I hated going into those meetings. Like, I wanted to give everyone 50 grand pay bumps a year because it wasn't my money. And my team were great and I loved them and I would have, exactly. But like, you go in there and you're like, I know I'm going to break this person's heart in some way. So again, for me as a manager, like having those regular catch-ups one-on-one and discussing salary and being transparent about what was realistic is really important as well. So the more you get into that muscle memory as a manager or an employee of having conversations with people that you trust about salary, the easier it'll be when you get to the squeaky bum time and you're in there talking asking about that number when it's your actual review. So.
Okay, I want to come back to that about the manager in a second based on a question, but I just want to finish up with the small company versus large company. My experience of both sides is that with a larger company, you really need to be much more structured because there is less flexibility that they have. So the managers only have a very small amount of flexibility. Everything is driven by a very large HR process. So you need to know when the cycle is, you need to plan in advance, you need to make sure you understand what their rating system is, what their bell curve situation is, all those things that the managers don't have a lot of control over, and you need to be really upfront and ask, what is the rating system? How do I make sure that I'm on the top of it? What do you need from me this year? What do you need from me in the next 6 months? You have to be really proactive in large companies and much more in advance. With smaller companies, you have a lot more flexibility. Managers have a lot more power, generally speaking. They have more control over the budget, and sponsors are much more important. So, I bang on about mentors and sponsors a lot, but having a sponsor who is someone who will advocate for you on the leadership team, who understands what you contribute to the business, who is, very pro you, that is amazing when it comes to salary and promotions. So really make sure that you've got a sponsor that is part of a leadership team or even better, senior leadership team. Coming back to the manager question, there was a question from the audience around, what do I do when I have so many great people in my team and I love everyone and I want to give everybody heaps of money, but I don't have the budget as a manager? Josh, I feel like you've got some stories on that.
There's no easy answer to this question. Look, I think, again, it's all about expectation setting. So if you've got someone that's moving into the 7th or 8th year of their career and they're expecting the same salary bump that they're getting in the 2nd or 3rd year of their career because you haven't coached them on what is realistic, then they're going to be disappointed. We've said this numerous times, it is really about that constant communication. I think the other thing as well, look, I'm covering all the same points because I think they're key, right? The people that get rewarded with the greatest pay bumps are the ones that have demonstrated discretionary effort that adds value. And that doesn't mean working outside of your 8 hours or whatever. The world is very different these days. People have families, people have all that sort of stuff. It's really, let me use an example. Who watched the IKEA hacking presentation earlier out there today, right? That was so cool. And I sat there going, I have no idea what's going on, but that is so cool. We used to have guys that I worked for who were, again, so smart and they would work on things like that. And I'd be like, all right, let's sit down. I can't coach you on technology, but I can coach you on business a little bit. So why don't we pull together a bit of a business plan as to how we could commercialize something using what you're building here, right? And I want you to create the business plan. And if you create a business plan and I think it's compelling, I'm going to give you a day a week for the next 8 weeks or whatever it is you ask for to actually go and work on that cool side project. That's the way to unlock that time and that different conversation. It's a learning experience, but your manager's bought in. There's no point doing something, sorry, that's not right. There's absolutely point doing the cool techie stuff regardless. It won't get the outcome that you think you're going to get as a tech person if your manager doesn't see the value in it. That's just the way it is, unfortunately. The number of times I would have, again, great tech people that were stuck in a rut where they were in the organisation because rather than listen to what I suggested last year and go and do a Toastmasters course or, write a technical blog or do something community focused, they just went and got another 3 technical certs when they already had pretty much all the technical certs. You've got to be well-rounded. You've got to do all that sort of stuff, and you've just got to, I'll keep going, but I'll stop there.
I've got another rant question for you. And we feel you, whoever asked this question, why is the salary different for new hires versus existing employees when it costs so much to recruit and train someone? We feel you. Isn't that a great question? Who wants to rant?
Well, this is already got answered. They're different budgets, right? Like there is a different budget for hiring people than there is for retaining people, and that is unfortunately how it is. It's there's a reason people change jobs a lot early in their career. And there's a reason that, we don't discourage it. And there's a reason why when I would hire a grad, I'd be like, look, as a grad, you're going to get 50 grand. In 2 years' time, you're going to be worth 100 grand, but I can't pay you that because that's not going to work for the system that we're hiring with. So give me 2 years, I will support you there, and then I'll call whoever you want and give you the most glowing endorsement so your next job, you're able to go and do. And you know what? Some of those grads would come back then 2 years later. So you've just got to think about it as, the career of the person, and as a manager, it was really important for me, to have that mindset, right? Like, I want this person to be in my career forever, because God knows I've moved companies a number of times as well, and I've hired people along with me to multiple companies because I've made the effort to sort of build those relationships. That's all we can do.
I think the only thing I would add to that part is tech in Australia is tiny. Like, there isn't anyone that doesn't know everyone, or you're living at about like a 2 degrees separation from anyone else in tech, I would say. Like, I can probably guarantee you will know someone in this room that can introduce you to someone else within this room with no problems at all. You wouldn't be hard pressed to figure that out. And that exists in the community. So build those networks, build those relationships, put the time and effort into it, so that later down the line, things like that come around where you can come back and have that conversation of like, hey, and it goes both ways, right? It's like, if you've been a great manager, you best believe I'll be coming back. The best manager I've ever had. We're still friends. And she pulls me into doing stuff like this and then recommends me into doing other stuff. Like, sponsor right here. It goes a really long way. And that was 5 years ago. Like, she was there for like about 6 months. And I was like, this is the best manager I'll ever have. But like, they set the standards and you go back to them.
I did not pay her
She
anything.
did not pay me.
I did give her free accommodation, actually.
We'll take what we can get at this stage. What is my value proposition? I don't know anymore. But those relationships last, and they do come back around, and just make sure that you are building both ways, I think really goes to stand. I don't know how to end that sentence, but here we are.
Just to close that out, the one thing I would caution against, because it can burn bridges, is the flip side of that, where you go and accept an offer from a competitor and then take it back to your manager. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but have the conversation with your manager like early on in the piece so that they can use that as negotiation to their manager. Don't come at the last stage and make it a full dive and save type thing. Realistically, like, I've had that happen to me so many times as a manager, and I'll say to the person, like, you get one chance at that. Like, if you do that again, then I'll let you walk, and that's just how it is, kind of thing. There needs to be, and if your manager's a douche, then like, ignore what I'm saying. But there needs to be two-way trust in these relationships, right? And you just playing off salaries from competitors to your manager, that's burning the relationship in the other direction as well, right? So just be mindful of that, I guess.
Yeah, because generally speaking, your managers and your leadership do want to retain you, generally speaking. Obviously, there's the scenario where you should leave, but generally they want to retain you. So remember, going into those conversations, it is always about trying to find a win-win, trying to make it easy for them. That's probably my biggest tip, is if like our job is to make it, and R as in as an individual contributor, my job is to make it as easy as possible for my boss to tick their boxes and say yes to what I want. That's my job. So how do I make it easy for them? How do I make it really like, here's all the data, you know, I know this is I know this is a cycle, I know all of the things, and here you go, make it easy, give it to them on a platter. You've answered a lot, there's so many amazing questions. We could definitely talk all day. And you've answered quite a lot of them as we've been going, just by what you've been saying. Promotions, because I'm conscious we talked about promotions in the abstract as well. I think a lot of it is similar, right? Is there any kind of different things that you want to call out in terms of people looking for promotions, because that can tie with salaries as well?
I think the only thing I'd add is that number of years of experience doesn't automatically mean that you deserve a promotion in either direction. I think that managers that hold over inexperience over people's head to block promotions is also a dick move, quite frankly. I don't think that you should have to have 5 years of, you know, whatever coding before you get moved up the banner if you're demonstrating value in other ways. But equally, if you've just been phoning it in for 4 years in role and that's the general average, then you don't get that promotion either, basically. So nothing more to add other than that, I think.
When the conversation falls into, well, you haven't really demonstrated X skill and we really need that, and you're sitting there being like, there is no place for me to demonstrate that X skill because you're not giving me any opportunities to do that at all. So in a consulting example, they're like, well, we haven't really seen you doing like stakeholder management on a client project. And I'm like, put me on a client project and leave me do that so I can show you I can do this. And those are really, really hard to manage, because then it's like, well, you have this expectation which is not really based in reality because you're not giving me the opportunity to do that. And what I'd say is really kind of drill into those with your manager, like, okay, this is not the reality of the business. And this kind of goes back to that point earlier of understanding the business and the values and where everything is sitting in that economic timeline. Sit down with them, like, okay, you want to see stakeholder management, which is a lot of communication skills. How else can I show you that? Can I go and do a talk? Can I go and manage a internal thing that will show you that I can have a multiple relationship management thing that I'm maintaining those relationships and making sure everyone's turning up and doing the things? How else can I show you those skills that don't seem feasible and you're kind of just putting a blanket ban on that's not happening?
It's a really important point, because if you're getting that feedback from your manager that you haven't demonstrated X on a customer, 9 times out of 10, or every time I've asked that question, it's because I have to go to a promotion board. I don't get to just promote people unless I'm working for a 5-person company. I've got to make the justification upwards, and there will be criteria, and that criteria will be demonstrating, you know, a number of tick boxes that need to be achieved. So if that hasn't been done, then yeah, don't leave that room until you've agreed a plan, and then go put it in writing and email it afterwards so that you know exactly how you're going to bridge that gap, so you don't get the same feedback twice. That's what you really want to try and avoid in those situations.
Yeah, the written stuff, oh my God, I live and breathe by it now. I've learnt my mistakes. You'll agree to things on calls and that's about it, and you'll never hear about it again. Or if you don't have regular catch-ups with your manager or your person who's going to be doing these checkboxes, there's only so many things they can keep track of. They've got 100 other things to be doing at the same time. Follow up with emails, follow up with follow-ups and catch-ups of, hey, so we talked about this. This is how far along I am on that achievable goal that we discussed, and this is where it's at. This might be the extra thing I need from you to help me get to the rest of it. Like, get them involved in the process as much as you can, and based on their capacity as well. But they're usually going to want to help if you keep pushing them to try and help you.
And the person that asked about, as a manager, what do I do to help my team when I don't have lots of money to give them? I think giving them opportunities for stretch projects, so it's going to help them, if not in their own role currently, in their next career opportunity, is something that as a manager you can do to help. And also giving them projects that are in their passion zone or areas that they really want to be working, and making sure they've got time within their day-to-day role to do that is definitely going to help retain them as well. There was a few questions around salary, like asking, you know, do I ask for what I want first? Do I wait for them to offer me? And the same thing if I'm going for a new job, what do I say when they say, what are you earning? Which the recruiters like to ask you first. So I'm interested in the thoughts around disclosure.
Yeah, this was a blind spot to me. We were talking about this yesterday, and I didn't realise that you weren't meant to say what you're currently earning when you go for a job interview or whatever kind of thing, because that gives them a baseline to work from. Full on me, I guess. Look, Again, I think it depends. I think it depends on the person. You'll have a number in your head that you're anchored to, and that might be something that you're aiming for at a top level. It might be something that you need to pay your mortgage. It might be something that is a high enough percentage over what you're currently earning to justify the change. If you can back the number in your head up with enough of those reasons, I see no problem hanging that out there to a prospective employer. But you obviously do run the risk that you might be leaving money on the table if they were going to offer more. Realistically, though, if you've done your research and you're confident enough about what you think you're worth to be asking the number, you probably already know what the market looks like anyway. You probably already know what a good salary for your range is anyway. So I'm on the side of having an anchor number, whether you say it out loud, at least have it in your head. What I will say not to do is write the number down on a piece of paper, walk in, put it in front of the person, and then just stare into their soul for 10 minutes. I assume this happened to me once, and I assume they saw something on YouTube around negotiation. Don't do that. That's other than that. I wasn't going to tell that story, but yeah.
What was the question again?
Do you give them, what number do you give them? Like, if do you wait for them to give you a number? Do you give them a number? Yeah.
Okay. So, especially from a woman perspective, where I've been in communities where I've had women come up and they're like, yeah, it's been a struggle. Like, it's like at Women Who Code when we run events, like literally last month's event 2 weeks ago, she's like, yeah, it's been a bit of a struggle. God, I'm really struggling. Like, I have to support my parents, and she's telling me all these things, and she's like, and she tells me what she's on. I'm like, this is the most underpaid I've seen anyone for a tech lead position. What is happening? And she's like, yeah, I kind of raised it, but they kind of said it's like market. Then I kind of left. I'm like, that's not market. And she's like, really? Like, I thought I was angry, but I wasn't sure if I should be. And that's the kind of gap that exists of talk to as many people around you as you can. Yes, there's clauses about what you can and can't disclose within the business, but there are communities existing for this reason. Go find a community that you can build connections with and kind of talk about these things, because especially when you go into asking for numbers and building up that, like, okay, this, and do that point, right? Like, a lot of us tend to not sit down and actually look at what we need, and we just look at, hey, this person's making this much money in this role, I should probably be at that number. Have a sit down and actually value. It was like, okay, on a monthly basis, these are my non-negotiables. This is kind of like financial planning tips now. I don't know why I'm doing that, but like on a monthly basis, I'm like non-negotiables, like this is my gym, this is how much I have to pay for this. This is all these non-negotiables I have to pay and I cannot live without. That's my basis. And I'm like, I will figure out what I need at a minimum, and then I can add on top of that. I'm like, okay, anything around this I'm going to be comfortable with. And then you start having those conversations, all right, what are other people around this having, and how does that feel, and what's it like? And then have that tribe around you of people who know they will, like, they'll support you, because there's nothing worse than going into a promotion conversation having real anxiety around it and not being pumped up and not feeling like you should get that. Have the people around you being like, you deserve all that, and you deserve even more, and you should ask for even more than that. Like, have the people pump you up before, because it feels a lot nicer going into those conversations. But yeah, in terms of actual numbers, sorry, I did forget the question again as I started talking. But in terms of whether you should bring a number in, calculate that for yourself, and then have a look at the market numbers and kind of fit it in where you'll be happy, and add an extra 5-10 on that, because they'll bring it back down. So, yeah.
Maybe. Just to round out, I think also, if there are other things that are important to you, having a number as an anchor is just easy to get that out of the way, because it then becomes table stakes. Really, if you say, hey, look, this is what I'm looking for, if we think we can get to there down the track, then let's continue the conversation. They may go, well, that's just not in the ballpark, and then you're ready to walk away. If you're agreed on number, then you can start to talk about, well, actually, I do school pick-up and drop-offs on Mondays and Tuesdays. I like to be flexible on Friday, kind of thing. You're in a much stronger negotiating position, because you've already got the hard bit out of the way in terms of the number, and you're not sitting there stressed about, am I negotiating when, then they're going to go, okay, because we've conceded all these things for you, now we're going to lowball you on salary, because we've already conceded in a bunch of other areas. So just another thought there.
Yeah, and within that, I think it's worth, I'm sure people know pay calculators and all those things, right? Actually sit down and see what that extra number you want. Like if it's an extra 10K that you're like, I just have to hit this milestone, have a look at how much that is actually coming into your monthly pay, right? It's not gonna, like after a certain value, like with taxes and stuff, it doesn't actually equate and it doesn't make it, like you'll see a difference of like $300 or something. Like it's at the end of the month. There's gonna be more value in having those conversations and trying to get those known, like, can I get a trip to a conference where I'll have these like learnings and stuff, which is gonna be paid for by you. You're getting a lot more tangible outcome and like value out of that than just that extra pay bump at the end of the day, which half of it might be eaten by tax. So have a look at what the actual value proposition is in terms of, is it worth fighting for that extra 10K there, where it could be something else you can kind of have a conversation and be creative about.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think whatever you're comfortable with, I think there's pros and cons of you saying what you want versus waiting for the employer to say what they're willing to offer. I think it can go either way. I think you can handle the conversation no matter which way you go, just personal preference. With applying for a new role, when they ask for what are you currently on, I don't agree with disclosing what you're currently on if you're trying to increase your salary significantly and you're not being paid market rate currently. My tip for that would be flipping it and saying, I'm actually interested in understanding what a fair salary is that you would be offering for this role, or flipping it and saying, actually my expectations based on the market rate and based on my experience would be X, Y, Z. So kind of flip that rather than saying, I'm not going to tell you what I'm on, which always comes across really awkward. I've had so many people do that to me before. As an ex-recruiter, I'm very good at getting them to actually tell me, and recruiters can be very persistent, and managers can as well, but just flip it. And so, you know, what is a fair market salary that you believe this role is worth? Or, yeah, these are the expectations that I have based on market rate and what I bring to the table. I'm conscious of time, and we haven't really touched on the redundancy piece. There was a question around, and so this will be our last question because, yep, time. Should people that have gone past the junior, mid-level career be massively concerned about the job shortages and layoffs happening? Or does it affect lower and entry-level workers more? And then I guess also on that, you know, the whole climate of redundancy at the moment, you know, do you think that there's, you know, should people be concerned? Do you see issues with people getting other roles if they are made redundant or getting that held against them? Just that general gist.
Without getting too controversial, I think we've reached a more sustainable point in the industry at the moment. I think some of the salary increases and the wages that people were getting paid with very little amount of experience wasn't sustainable. But we do still have a structural shortage of technical people that isn't going to be solved anytime soon, right? Like there's people in universities and all that type of stuff. Should you be concerned about it? I mean, obviously, because it's your job and, you know, people have got bills and all that type of stuff. Should you be concerned that if it happens, it will be negative and count against your career? Absolutely not. Because more often than not, redundancies happen structurally because a company's not doing well or because they've made a decision to try and jack up the share price by taking costs out of the business. I have never looked at a CV or been in an interview and passed someone over because they got made redundant from their last job. It just wouldn't happen. It's not the right approach at all, basically. So from that perspective, don't worry about it at all. We're seeing tech. Tech is like in everything now. Like I said, we've got massive customers that are oil and gas giants and energy suppliers and banks and all of that. They have their own product teams now. They're hiring more tech staff than the tech companies are. So there's never been a better time to be getting a job. So get creative, understand what's out there. You know, understand that if it does happen and you get made redundant, you'll be able to bounce back on your feet. We're in the best industry in the world, quite frankly, to work in that regard. So yeah, just roll with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sentiment around what it means to be made redundant has changed a lot as well, just in general. Like, people are now a lot more like, it wasn't you. Like, we do understand. It might feel like if it's the first time you're going through it, there's a lot of feelings attached to it, and I completely sympathize and empathize with that. But it has changed, where it's like, it wasn't you, like, it's a business thing. Like, at the end of the day, there is still so much more that you have to offer and will offer in other places. And more and more people, I think, are getting a lot better at that and understanding that. And in general, I mean, like, I took a career break and I was like, no more, thank you very much. And it got a lot easier to have those conversations. And I think for me anyway, it just comes back down to that communication piece of, this is what was happening, this is what's happened, and having that kind of very open conversation is what works for me. Might not be the reality for everyone else. I completely understand that. But yeah, building that kind of relationship from the get-go of this is what the scenario is, this is what it was like, this is what I'm now looking for in terms of a role, or what makes me feel great and add value back to a business is this.
Yep, and in terms of the question around does it affect early career, more senior career differently, I haven't seen it affected any differently. It's been the same in terms of what I've seen across a lot of organisations across Australia and New Zealand, but agree with all of those points. Some key takeaways up here that we've talked about today. Feel free, there were so many great questions, feel free to come and have a chat with us as well at the drink session. A few of the resources that are some of our favourite resources for this type of stuff. I know I had to put Bitches Get Riches on there, like so good, mostly for the name. No, it was good content as well. But yeah, thank you so much. Loved this conversation. Thank you for joining me, Josh and Akanksha. I did forget to introduce Pickles as well on your introduction slide. So cute. But thanks everyone for listening and for coming, and yeah, enjoy the drinks.